Tony Whatley, welcome to Succession Stories. I'm excited to have you on the show today.
Hey, Laurie, good to connect with you again. And I look forward to having this conversation with you and your audience.
You've got such a cool story because you are passionate about cars. You created a business around getting people to talk about cars, and then you sold the company. Let's dive in. Let's talk about how did this all start? You were a car aficionado, and where did it go from there to say, I'm going to create a business and bring like-minded folks together?
The idea for starting that business actually wasn't anything that was in my mind until it became the idea. And where I'm going with that is that as a car fanatic and hanging out on the forums at that time, this was early 2000s. And we were members of different forums. And for me, it was a General Motors type car. So Corvettes, Camaros, Firebirds. That was kind of the thing that I was into at the time. And we were happily being members of something that was already existing, and we were contributing. We're writing articles and writing how-tos and doing those kind of things. And then the owner of that particular website really wasn't managing it very well. And there was a couple instances where we would log in and the entire website would just be gone. It wouldn't even be there. And a couple days later, it would come back online, and all that content that we had created would be deleted. And so after that happened twice, a few of us that were the main people that were contributing to this platform for free, mind you, because it was our hobby, we just had a heart to heart with the guy, and we said, "Hey, why aren't you paying your server bills?" Because back then, if you didn't pay your bill, they would just hard delete. If you didn't do a backup, they would just hard delete it. It's like fresh it up. And rather than him taking constructive feedback from people who really supported his company and were trying to give him very critical advice on how to run this more effectively, he kind of copped an attitude, and he's like, "Well, if you think you can do a better job, you should go start your own." And for someone like me who had already taught myself Photoshop and digital marketing, and I knew how to code with HTML and build websites, it was actually my first side hustle was building websites. I said, I've never set up a server before to host a forum, but I'm sure that the instructions come with the software that you buy to do that." And it was very easy for me to go buy that software license. I think at the time it was like $300, and rent a server at that time was probably $50 a month. It was really inexpensive because it wasn't a lot of traffic. And so I started to build that website, and people that were audience of the other website realized that I was one of the contributors. So they get curious, like, "Hey, he's going over here starting this thing. Let's go see what he's up to." And then within a year, we became number one in that niche, the General Motors, all the websites out there. We had about maybe 10,000 members at that time. When I sold the company, we had over 300,000 members, and we had about 150 advertising accounts. We generated our revenue from ads and, from manufacturers, even Chevrolet, Cadillac, General Motors Performance, tire companies, performance shops, racetracks, like you name it, they were advertising on our website.
Wow, that's really cool to understand the business model. I was going to ask you about that. There's different ad surveying you can include on a website, which gets general ads, but you were literally selling placements and then managing those placements for General Motors and the other car companies.
Yeah, and what made the forums more unique at the time versus print media, which was our main competitor at the time, so all your magazines and papers, is that the members of those businesses could have their own account and interact with our audience directly. So if you think about this, if you're manufacturing a part, if you wanted to run that ad or put an article into a magazine, you usually had to do that 60 to 90 days in advance before it gets published because they're building magazines months in advance. Well, if you were advertising on our website, you could do it today. Like if you just wanted to build something and you had a concept and you put it out there and wanted to test it, they could log in with their account and go, "Hey, we're so and so, and this is a part we want to develop. This is a target price we think we'd like to sell it at. Would you like to pre-order it? What's your interest level?" And they would get a bunch of pre-orders, and that would tell them, "Hey, this is a good product or not." They would go develop that. So I think that being real time is a huge advantage back then for these advertisers.
Yeah, absolutely. So just to go back to the audience, so you built this forum from scratch. People had come over from disparate forums. They were following you. They saw what you were doing. You got to kind of that early core audience of 10,000 folks, you said. And when did the advertisers come in? At what level did they come in at when you had an audience of 10,000, or did they expect you to have 100,000 before they were interested?
We had some actually day one because they were so frustrated with the way the other site was being run that they knew that they were betting on us. When people are investing in people, it's usually the CEO they're investing in or the brand, right? So a lot of times you'll find that people invest in people versus the brand. So the brand hasn't been established yet. We're just building it, but they knew that, hey, these people are going to do it the right way. They're more professional. And the other way to entice new advertisers is that we always maintained a grandfather clause. We say, hey, if you come in now, it's really inexpensive because we don't have a lot of traffic. But if you stick with us and you never delete your membership as an advertiser, we'll hold you to those rates as long as this business is viable. And so, you know, 7 years, 10 years into it, there were still companies that started us long after we sold that had that contract in place that their rates didn't increase. And to give you an idea, is back then, our lowest rate back then was like 125 a month. It wasn't a lot of money for the entry level. When we sold the website, probably more like $700 a month. And so that was a pretty big swing. We just kept increasing the rates as traffic grew and our internal costs grew and staffing grew and overheads grew. So the people that got in early adopters, and we grandfathered in at every level. So even the people that showed up last, like they just got locked in at the price. It was something that we realized was very valuable, reward loyalty.
Tell me about the business itself. And for you, was this a side hustle or were you working in it full time?
It was absolutely a side hustle. I was still working oil and gas as a project manager, and I enjoyed the corporate life. I was getting a lot of money invested into me in leadership, and I was getting to play with the newest technologies and offshore and doing a lot of things. And I got to understand business contracts at that level. And really, for me, the oil and gas, working those big numbers, I was managing hundreds of millions of dollars in projects. It allowed me to become more effective at making decisions without having I guess, a bias or reaction to money. So a lot of times people make emotional decisions when it comes to money or buying things, and they don't always make the right decisions because their emotions are involved. At that level, I wasn't in corporate. I was well compensated to make sure I was making the right decisions without the emotional response to money.
Did you hide that you had this side hustle going? And as it got bigger and bigger, how did it come to the surface where you made a decision to, and maybe I should ask, did you make a decision to leave that oil and gas job full time?
I didn't really tried to hide it, but I didn't really blend it either. Even at that point back then, LinkedIn was kind of like the job postings and resume website. It really wasn't a social platform at the time. And I was getting these requests from people that from both industries, automotive and oil. And so I even created two different LinkedIn profiles at the time. So I had Tony Whatley hyphen oil, Tony Whatley hyphen automotive to keep those contacts separated because they didn't really have any relevance. So there was no, you know, conflict of interest or anything like that. And people that knew me at the job site, they saw a glimpse of my lifestyle. I'm gonna have much nicer cars, bigger house, things like that. Then they were curious, like, "Yeah, how you have all this? Like, you have the same job as we do, and we're making $100,000 a year, and like you have all these cars and a house." And I said, "Well, it's because I created businesses. I started doing things, and the thing is, when it comes to side hustles, I think people hear that word, and even the title of my book, Side Hustle Millionaire, right? I go into the mindset of that word because I think a lot of times people think about side businesses and side hustles as a hobby business and they treat it like a hobby and then they get hobby results and they wonder why they're not getting above hobby results. Like everybody wants to be a professional, everybody wants professional results, everybody wants professional compensation, but then they treat everything like a hobby and I never have. I treated it like a legit business.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And take me through the steps of this business. Did you bring on a partner or did you do this on your own bootstrap?
We actually started with two other partners. One of them, within 6 months, we could tell just wasn't going to hold his weight. And the other one was more focused on the sales and cold outreaches. He owned a recruiting agency. So he was good at getting on the phone and just asking for advertising dollars. And I was really good at conversations. I was more the technical guy in the background that built everything and did all the graphic design. And so I'm the visual and the technical guy. And I was the one writing the articles and things like that, where he just more enjoyed it as an enthusiast.
How did you grow? How did you get new users to the forum? And were they also subscribing to an email list? Tell me a bit about the metrics and growth.
That's a great question. I haven't been asked that one in a long time. And we did have tactics on how to grow the membership. And this actually would still apply even today with Facebook groups and things like that. And so we could see from our server logs the people that were viewing the website every day, but the people that weren't logging in. So there was a discrepancy between registered viewers that were logging in every day versus actual viewers visiting the website. And by that point, it was probably about 50% of the people visiting the website were not logged in and didn't have accounts. And so we started to realize, like, in order to create more interest with advertisers, we need to have more registered accounts. So how do we get more members to join and use their email address? And at the time, even we were asking for their actual mailing address for a while because we were building mailers and stuff like that. But the easiest way we did it was to do giveaways. And so here's a win-win-win thing for us. We had maybe at that time 30, 35 sponsors at the time. And each month we would just go to one that was kind of a bigger sponsor that could afford to do this. And we say, hey, we want to feature you this month as the main sponsor, and we're going to do a giveaway, and you're going to give the winner a gift card for 500 bucks. And then we're going to need another one for the people that are new registers that can also win 500 bucks. There's two different giveaways, 1,000 bucks total, one for existing members, the other one's for new members that month. And so we would post those things like, hey, if you would like to win $500 in parts, you can either be a member or a new member and you get two chances at it, right? And so after that happened, it was like magic because everybody started registering. And so we started to have probably 80% logging in with actual accounts versus what we called lurkers because they were just lurking.
Lurkers, they were lurking.
Lurkers. They were just lurkers.
And did you inherently understand the value between those different types of users? Did you value them differently in your business?
We did not value them differently because we could see that we're getting a lot of traffic. I mean, at the peak of this website, to give you guys an idea, we're about 100,000 unique visitors per day would visit that website. And on average, they would stay there between 9 to 15 minutes in that range. And
That's
so
a
it
long
was actually,
time.
it's a really long time and a lot
Yeah.
of people going through the front door. And so we knew that the value of the company was also based on the database size. So if we had actual email addresses that we could prove and they had to confirm to be able to log in and things like that. So we didn't understand the corporate valuations and things like that until later on when we went through the whole acquisition process. But we knew that just from running businesses, like what are things that are interesting to people that are building a company? You know, how do we create value in this company? How do we create revenue? How do we reduce overheads? How do we become more efficient? How do we make sure the customer journey is a good experience? And one of the things that we did from things that were different from all the other forums is we always stayed ahead of the performance of the servers. A lot of times back then, websites would start to go slower as they got busier and people would wait too long to upgrade. Well, we were always monitoring proactively the logs on the server loads, and we could say, hey, this thing's starting to become 75% of capacity. People aren't noticing it right now, but we need to move it up. So we'd always upgrade the server size and the speeds as we're growing the company.
So to go back to the question about growth, you on Facebook and growing audience
No,
from other
this is
platforms?
all we didn't have any of that
You
because
pre Facebook ads, all of that, just
pre-Facebook.
organic and through the list and using sweepstakes,
Yeah, we sold that website in 2007, and Facebook really wasn't public until 2008, and Instagram wasn't around until 2010.
which makes this story even more impressive because it was truly organic growth. You
Truly
weren't able
organic.
to borrow the audiences from other folks. So you were growing the business. So let's fast forward to that point. How did it all come together for the acquisition, for you to sell the company?
You know, it was something that the best companies are really never ever listed, and you know that because you're in the same industry. A lot of them just get approached, and so at this time, to give you context for time frame, our bread and butter at the early set of this company was the Camaros and the Firebirds. Well, General Motors quit producing those in 2002. And although they've still remained very popular even till this day, 20 plus years later, we always had that little bit of fear that, hey, it's 2006 and it's been 4 years and they don't even make those cars anymore. Are we going to start talking about classic cars in a short time? And yeah, that has happened, but you don't know that when you're looking at the crystal ball. And so we started to see it was kind of the revenue growth and the membership growth. It was not plateaued yet, but it was starting to taper towards plateau. And so we're thinking, hey, this is probably peak time right now. And both of us were looking at different careers, and you know, he still owned a business. I was, you know, pursuing executive levels in corporate. So I said, you know what, it'd be all right if we sold this website because we'd have people that approach us and they just didn't know how to evaluate back then. Digital assets really weren't well known, and they didn't understand how to put a price tag on those things. So there would always be these low ball offers. They'd say, you know, $100,000, but you know, we were profiting right under $400,000 a year. So they didn't even understand that kind of business model. And then one of the days that private equity came in and they said, "Hey, we were interested in acquiring your website, but here's where they were different." They said, "We acquired this other one, this other one, this other," like the list of these other ones that were also top level websites that we were familiar with. We're all kind of in that network. We knew the owners. And two of them I recognized right away. And it's like, oh, wow, they sold to them. I was like, this must be legit because I know that guy runs a pretty tight ship too. So I reached out to one of the guys I got acquired and I said, hey, are these people, for real? And I was like, and he said, I can't tell you how much, but they're worth talking to. And so I was like, okay, he's serious about that. And that's when we said, okay, make us an offer. And they're not going to make a blind offer without putting a pixel into our database and understanding, the traffic and things like that. So that was part of the thing. Hey, can we embed our code into your website so we can see the traffic on our dashboard and see how busy you guys are and this and that? It's like, yeah, no problem. Our IT guy was like, yeah, that's not going to cause any problems. And so after a week, they came back and they said, okay, we're ready to make an offer. And, at that point, my partner and I were already thinking like a low number because we didn't know what it was worth. I think the number in our head was 800,000. Like we would sell 800,000, just 2 years times the profit, right? And their initial offer was 1.9. So it was over double the
Wow.
initial, like what we thought it was worth.
Yeah.
And so it was like, oh, wow, this is actually kind of real money talk. Like we didn't know that they were that serious. And so it wasn't until then that we brought in an attorney that managed, was in the M&A field and he knew a little bit about digital. Not many people did at that point. Even my CPA didn't know a whole lot about valuation and digital space. And we did some research and he's like, well, I think that their first offer is always going to be the low one. So you just counter, what do you want to make? And at that time, capital gains was 15%. And so I said, okay, we both want to clear 1 million after taxes. So we needed 2.3. And that was our next counter. It's like, we'll take 2.3. And we told them why. It's like, we're both going to clear 1 million on this deal. And they said, okay. Like they didn't even wince. They were like, okay. And so we're not going to go ask for do it twice, but knowing what I know now, the company was worth probably about 3.5.
How would you value it today if you were going to rewind and advise yourself how they were looking at it from a buyer perspective? What do you know now that you wish you knew then?
In those days, dollars, yeah, it would have been probably 3 to 3.5 is what it was worth back then in those dollars. And today's dollars, that's probably 5 million, 6 million.
But how would you have calculated that? How would you have gotten there? Was it a multiple
The
of
easiest
revenue?
way, the opportunity that we missed was understanding the value of our database because at that point we had also built a different website for performance trucks and that one also had 200,000 members in it. So my second best effort was still a very big site and we sold it the portfolio of websites. So think about what would it cost on somebody's company customer acquisition cost to build an email list of targeted consumers of 500,000 emails. And when we look at customer acquisition costs nowadays, usually cost between 30 to 50 cents, sometimes even $1 on really segmented niches. So just our database alone would have been worth between 300 to $500,000 by itself.
It's such an interesting point of view if people can understand from the buyer's perspective what constitutes value. And this is a great example, the database itself. And if they were going to replicate what you were doing, what would it cost them? How long what would it take? And so
Time.
when you countered and then their end, they figured that's a good value. They snapped and went for that number, which as you explained, your walkaway number, you were happy, you and your partner
Yeah.
were happy. So for the audience listening in today, um, I just want to double click on this because so many people don't really see their, I'll call assets of the business in the way that the buyer does. And I think this conversation is really important because it's spotlighting this exact example of how can we see the company through the lens of the buyer to understand value and not just price.
Absolutely. And they also had good strategic acquisition uh, planning because they were buying portfolios of these websites that was even in their introduction email, right? We bought all these websites. But what they were doing is they were buying the number one of all the brands. So the number one BMW, number one Audi, number one Porsche. Like they were finding these and cherry picking them to find the best portfolio of websites. And so here's the advantages they were also seeing. They could do in-house counsel, they could do in-house accounting, they could do in-house IT and server hosting. So they can consolidate all of our overheads into their central hub, greatly reducing their cost. That would make their EBITDA probably double, being real. And then on top of that, they could sell advertising packages as an a la carte for each individual. They could do groups like, oh, you're a General Motors parts manufacturer. Well, we own these 10 websites that are all General Motors focused. And, for a little bit more, we can put you in all these websites. And so when you start understanding their strategic advantage of buying all these websites and what they were planning, they were really just kind of playing around with the money with us.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, in today's market, it is common for multiple of revenue in some of these businesses if you have a recurring revenue business. And in your case, you had these long-standing advertisers. You also had the value of the database. So there any other assets that you think you would highlight as important to the acquirer?
The interesting thing about this was that I also ran a retail business on the same LLC because I saw there was a gap in advertising that nobody was selling custom wheels. And we have a car website. We had one person that was selling wheels, but it was all these Chinese replica, like low price wheels. Nobody was selling the high end stuff. And I said, you know what? We have a huge audience here. Like, I'm just going to start another business within the same LLC and just name it this. And basically, I sold wheels, and that became a seven-figure business on its own inside my own business, side hustle within a side hustle, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah, did
so
they acquire that too?
they didn't know, they have no interest in the retail side of it. And
Okay.
they're like, you can actually keep that. And so, like, that kind of shows you they knew the value of the database, the traffic, the advertising advantages, that they were willing to just carve out a seven-figure revenue section of it and be like, ah, that's good. Like, you can keep that part.
Yeah, they knew exactly what they wanted.
Yeah.
So tell me what happened at the time of the transaction. Did you and your partner stay on at all for transition?
We did. We stayed on for almost 2 years, and there was no non-compete. It was more about just making sure the culture stayed in fact. And I was the one that kind of built all the relationships with all the advertisers. And so we would have racing events and things like that around the country. And we're sponsoring car builds, and we're involved in the media and all kinds of different things. And so, it was important for them to make sure that the staff stayed on. And we wanted to make sure that, it's our baby. Anytime you create a business, you don't want to just sell it and hope it implodes. You actually want to sustain, and it's still in operation today. It's still the number one website in that niche.
That's incredible. And just to back to the side hustle point, you were still running this side business, correct?
Yes. Yes, I did
Amazing.
not leave corporate in the entire time I ran that or I sold it. And, that was another thing that I really gleaned from the corporate side and being in management is that processes and systems had to be in place, put the right people in place. And so I purposely experimented with this. The first year was the toughest because I was the one doing everything, right? The second year, I started thinking about, hey, I'm using these things in oil and gas. Why can't I just take some of the knowledge I'm learning from my job and apply it to my own small business? And you can. And so I wrote systems in our processes, and we hired a couple people to do this, the IT and the securities and stuff like that. And eventually, we're hiring people creating the marketing and the media and stuff like that, the contractors, 1099s. And I didn't have to be involved in the day-to-day operations of that website anymore. That was very important for my career in oil because I was also traveling a lot, and a lot of times I would be in different countries or I'd be on a boat in the middle of the ocean. So a lot of times I didn't even have access to do things. So they needed to operate without me being there. And so that's just putting the right people in the right place with the right systems.
Tell me about the emotional side of this, if there was one. We talked about the practical, transactional side. Was there an emotional side for you? Did you feel like it was letting go of your baby?
Absolutely. And this is the topic that I've really helped a lot of my clients, and I know that you help your clients with, is the the mental roller coaster that goes on with an acquisition deal. It's something that people don't really explain very well. And a lot of times people that have exited don't really want to talk about their deal, but you always kind of feel this reluctance to do it. And then you see the real numbers, and then you start having these negative self-talk that starts to creep in, like, am I selling out? Like all these social stigmas, like, are you selling out? Like, and people will accuse you of that. Some people don't understand the magnitude of a deal. And, to them, like, you're selling $100,000 thing, and they're like, oh, you're a sellout. Well, maybe if I was selling $100,000 thing, but multi-million-dollar deal, like, they don't understand that. And you're not going to tell them. So people sometimes have adverse reactions to that. And Yeah, some people in society look at people that are successful as villains, and you're just greedy and you're doing these kind of things. So you have all this negative talk that starts to creep into your mind when you're kind of working out this deal. And then you're worried about what are your employees or your staff going to think when you think it's kind of the same stuff. You always think the negative because we assume the negative. It goes up and down. There's highs and lows. And to be real, when you're kind of going through this deal, even today when you're working on these deals, it never really feels real until you see the wire transfer hit your bank account. And so you're doing all this work, you're doing the due diligence, they're nosy, their CPAs bothering you, legal people are going back and forth, and it's just all these different things going on, and you feel a little bit of that stress, and you feel like, are they just wasting my time? Are they actually going to buy it? Right? These things happen in every deal I've seen, and then the back end of that, when you do sell it and you do make the money, it's kind of like, now what? Like you're feeling kind of like, I still supposed to run this day-to-day operation, or there's a lot of weird mental hurdles to get through, and I think that that's something that more people need to be aware of and prepare themselves for when they go into a deal.
Absolutely. Since it was a PE deal, I'll ask you a couple other things about the deal structure. Did they offer you an opportunity to invest in their overall portfolio as a rollover?
They weren't interested in that.
Okay,
Yeah.
gotcha. And then were there any earnout terms?
There was a potential earnout for another 300,000 based on revenue targets. That
Okay.
was a lesson there too, because we did get burned on some of that, because when somebody gives you revenue targets, they also take away your responsibilities to dictate the result. And so if they realize that the earnout that they could pay is actually higher than what their revenue would have come in, they can manipulate those numbers. I'm not accusing them of doing that, but we've seen this happen too many times where they set some really high revenue target and it sounds good on the deal and you just want to make the deal go through, but then they don't collect on on accounts, and then they go, oh, we didn't hit the revenue target, and then they don't pay you. And what do? They go call those accounts and go, hey, you owe us money, and they still make their money.
Mm, good watch out to know about. Yeah, I appreciate that. Tony, this is a incredible story because as I guess we look at the timeline, this was a 5-year time horizon. Is that
Yeah, it
right?
was 5 years.
Incredible. And so then you transitioned. At what point did you completely punch out of the business that you sold? Did you stay on for another year or so?
I kept the wheel business, and that was a really easy side business because I learned how to dominate the SEO and the search features. And I was smart enough to watermark my website on all the customer photos that they would send me. And Google was just flooded with anybody that was searching specific types of wheels and cars. They would always come to my website. And that became a pretty good business because custom wheels nowadays are in the $4,000 to $5,000 a set range. So it's a pretty big ticket item for one transaction. Um, I just focused on really the career. I was going on the executive path and I was kind of working towards vice president, and I just wanted to see if I could do that. But around 2015, I had a near death experience racing cars, and I realized that what was missing in my life was impact. And although yeah, we impact our family and our closest friends, what was missing for me was impact on a greater scale. I was really uncomfortable being on cameras, or I had stage fright. I didn't want to do podcasting and all those kind of things. And I started writing the book I mentioned earlier, and the book did really well, and people wanted to interview me, and it became this one thing. And I just kept trying to avoid the public speaking, and being on camera just made me uncomfortable, insecurities and mental things, right? And so I hired a speaking coach and I joined Toastmasters and I did videos every single day, and they weren't very good. And I got better and better and better. And, now I'm on stages with thousands of people in the audience, and I have a #1 podcast. And it's just, it's crazy how you make yourself uncomfortable, but if your intentions are doing it for the right reason, you start to realize that your purpose needs to be stronger than your fears. And most of us, unfortunately, live with stronger fears than purpose.
Yeah, absolutely. The book is Side Hustle Millionaire,
Mhm.
as you mentioned, and the podcast is 365 Driven. And I definitely want people to check those out because they can really help, I think, as you're saying, and having that intention and making a change in your life if you want to. Um, Tony, let me ask you kind of this drop the mic question. We've covered a lot of ground today. In summary, what are 2 to 3 things that you want every business owner to take away?
I think that the important thing is to understand that if you're going to build a business, to focus on what the exit is at the beginning. I think too many people create really just unnecessary limitations in their earning income and their lifestyle because they maybe are jumping on the hottest trend or things like that. You know, when I see people in these business groups are like, hey, what kind of business should I start? Hey, what industry should I go in? Like, it's going to be a different answer for everybody. I think you should pursue things that you have genuine interest in or passion in, or at least curiosity in. That way you have that internal energy to drive you when things are going to get tough. And also quit looking at every industry based on like, I'm only going to do this one because it makes the highest amount of money. You can make money in all different ways, but also look at the business model. How does this really scale? Is it going to be worth something? Am I just creating a job or being self-employed? And there's nothing wrong with that. Just understand what your expectations are. A lot of things that you start, like I'm a coach. I'm not trying to scale to a $10 million company again. I'm just not going to do that. I enjoy my lifestyle. I like being able to go to the gym in the middle of the day and go skateboarding if I want to and go travel whenever I want to. So my non-negotiable list and my lifestyle has changed like through each decade of my life. And so be really honest with yourself of what kind of lifestyle do you want to live? How much income does that really require? What are the freedoms that you want? Freedom of location, freedom of mind, not being able, I can go on social media and I can go on these podcasts and say whatever I want on my show and not have anybody telling me I can't say things. So there's certain freedoms that have far more valuable value to me than money nowadays. So I think that, you know, think about the business model. That's number one. Make sure it's going to get you to the place that you want to go. Number two, I think you just got to take action. I think too many people listen to these shows, they read the books, they go to these seminars, they just always taking notes, they're just always learning, and there's nothing wrong with doing that, but they're not taking any action. That you basically the best entrepreneurs I know are always the ones that just did something and course corrected and improved incrementally as they went. But if you don't have a business checking account and you haven't started a DBA at the minimum and you haven't done those kind of things, those are things you could do in one day. You can go get your EIN number, you can get an LLC. That within 2 weeks, you should be able to have things that are actually moving you in the right direction. But just get started. That's the biggest thing.
I love it. Thank you. Great attitude, great positivity. Thank you so much, Tony, for sharing your experience. If people want to learn more, get in touch with you, what's a good way to do that?
Easy. My website is 365driven.com. And from there, you'll find the books, the social medias, the podcast, everything in one place.
Is there anything that inspires you? Favorite quote or something that drives, if I can use that as a pun, something that drives you you'd like to share?
Yeah, a quote that I came up with after the accident when I was really trying to seek what purpose is fear and confidence are both imaginary. Simply pick one and live with it.
Thank you. That's really meaningful. And also I meant to bring up earlier, you had talked about in your experience when you sold, there were some naysayers, and I'm sure on forums, people have opinions and they're happy to share them.
For sure.
In my research and preparing for this interview, I found a forum from 2007. Is that the year you sold the business?
Yes.
And people were pretty positive and supportive of you and your partner. The
Yep.
comments were great. And they were even trying to unpack the value of the business. I think they underestimated what you sold it
Yeah.
for. And they were doing the math on, well, there's this many and it's this many
Yeah.
advertisers. And people were like, hey, I hope that he's able to buy the cars that he wants and all it was very,
Yeah.
very positive. And I know, like you said earlier, some of the comments were probably negative, but it was really fun for me to go back in the archives and find that. And I'm sure with all these years that have gone by, you're the emotional side of all of this has kind of keened down,
Oh yeah.
and you look back on it in a positive way. But again, finding those positive comments, I thought was pretty cool.
Going back, almost 20 years, some of those people that were staff members of mine, I've helped them build and sell their own companies. And, you know, we didn't do a lot of showboating. And like I said, I hid from the camera. Like people saw my nice cars back then, but they didn't see all of them. And I didn't really want to put it out there and do that kind of stuff. And so we just ran a really fun place to hang out, and people recognized us as the leaders of the group. And the media treated us like VIPs, and we had access to everything. And so they would never even understand how much money that website was profiting every year. They just 400,000 a year back then was a lot of money. It's still a lot of money today. And it was a blessing to be able to create that, but also it was fun to watch people try to do the math and the mental gymnastics, and it just They weren't even close. They weren't even close.
So last question, did you buy yourself a trophy? Was there a deal trophy that you got?
I did. I bought a new Dodge Viper. I sold the website. So I bought a blue with white stripe Viper, and I still own that car today, too.
I love it. Tony, thank you so much for coming on Succession Stories and sharing your story with me and helping our audience understand what opportunities could lie out there for them.
All right, Laurie. Thank you for having me on, and I can't wait to have you on my show.
Absolutely. I look forward to it. And to our audience, thank you so much for tuning in today. For more succession stories, be sure to subscribe in your favorite podcast player. Also, subscribe on our YouTube channel, The Business Transition Sherpa. Tune in next time for more insights from transition to transaction.